Okay, we are here again with Christopher Dembik, the macro analysis from Saxo Bank, in another macro analysis video, as we always used to do with him, ready to learn about what is going on in the macro situation in the world. And the first thing that I want to go through, Christopher, is the change that we have seen in the politics of the Fed that they have announced not a long time ago. No, this change in the objective of inflation, that 2% is not going to be anymore the objective of the inflation, the goal of inflation, but they're going to have a range to move through. And some people have written this as a possibility of having big inflations without changing the politic of in interest rates in the Fed. What do you think about that? What do you think about this change? And what do you think this is going to affect us in the next years?
Yeah, well, I think it was interesting because this move is obviously quite important because it will have an influence also on the European Central Bank. What I see is that the mandatory part for the Federal Reserve is to have much more flexibility in terms of monetary policy. If you take a look, I mean, you cannot have much more flexibility with interest rates. You can really have much more flexibility with quantitative easing. So the only way was to move a little bit the target, especially inflation target. There has been a lot of discussion regarding rising inflation in the coming years. I have to say that so far we are not sure where inflation is heading to in the short term. I guess we could face higher inflation in the short, medium term if we have a lot of redistributive policy, if we have also localization of supply chain, if we have on the top of that, of course, still a lot of monetary stimulus. But as a matter of fact, I think what the Federal Reserve wants to do is just to give a lot of flexibility to monetary policy because we understand quite well that economic situation is still very weak. It will be extremely weak in the coming years, and we are not very optimistic regarding what's going to happen in terms of recovery. So in the case that we never know inflation overshoot the 2% target, the Federal Reserve doesn't want to have to increase interest rates in the worst case situation. So I think that we should be very careful regarding inflation forecast. We know that, I mean, you have economists that are working on daily basis on inflation forecast, and most of the time, 90% of the time, they get it wrong in a short-term period, but also in a long-term period. But what we need to understand is that the only leverage for the Federal Reserve to get a little bit flexibility in terms of monetary policy was the inflation target. They cannot do anything else. So the idea is that in the coming years, and it has been very clear with the latest Federal Reserve meeting, is that we will have a very accommodative monetary policy. The Federal Reserve is not optimistic regarding the recovery. They expect that the recovery momentum will weaken in 2021, 2022, and I agree with them. They are still careful regarding inflation forecast. They consider that in the next 2-3 years, we won't have inflation overshoot the 2% target. But in case it happens, let's say because you will have higher oil prices, we never know, then they don't want to be in the situation to be in a corner where they have to increase interest rates while the economic situation is not good. So I think it was a very smart move from the Federal Reserve. Hopefully the other central banks will follow the same path. I don't think the European Central Bank really need to do so because we know that inflation expectations are decreasing in the Eurozone, so we are not in the same situation than in the United States. But the broad message was clearly that we will do whatever it takes, again, no matter the path of inflation, in order to stimulate further the economy. And we don't have any choice. I mean, we see that the economic recovery is getting weaker and weaker. We got the latest statistics are not very optimistic. So we need central bank. And also we need, as Mr. Powell clearly stated, we need also fiscal stimulus.
Actually, this is very interesting because one thing is the target that the Fed might have, and another thing is if it's if this can be, I mean, if this can be possible, because what I see is that there are many deflationary dynamics, you know. So this might happen, of course, and if it happens, that's they have the means to do it. But what I see, I mean, one thing is the public inflation that is clear, and this public inflation is one thing. The real inflation is another thing. But there are many deflationary pressures, like for instance, the accelerated innovation that has come through given the COVID. Even if we, for instance, see a normalized growth rate, for instance, at 2-3% due to technology. So do you think this scenario might lead to a high global PE ratio? I mean, in that case, this is possible. So we might see the markets keep being expensive, money coming in. There are many circumstances that this situation is getting a little bit weird. I mean, there are many things that I don't quite understand. So yeah. What do you think about this? What do you think that if this is if we take for granted that this is the real scenario and we are going to have this deflationary scenario, what's your take on that? Do you think the markets might sustain this craziness that we see?
Yeah, I mean, as I told you, in the short, medium term, I think we can still debate whether inflation will increase, overshoot the 2% target. I think we see the path, but we don't have clear view on it. But in the long run, clearly, I mean, I think we are in a world of deflationary forces. You have said it very clearly that demographics, new technology, the level of debt, all that are driving inflation down in the long term. So I think we could have, let's say, in the 2-3 years period, higher inflation. Why not? And we need to check. But in the long run, let's say in 5-10 years, we will be in a world of deflation. And I think the biggest driver of deflation is demographics. I mean, we see in all the countries, demographics is clearly give you the path for the way inflation will evolve in the long term. I don't know how the market will react. I think a lot of investors are already understood that deflation is the long-term trend. And I think a lot of investors have already talked about it quite for a long time over the past years. They understand that it should not completely reshape the way the financial market are functioning. But in the short term, they're mostly worried about the spike in inflation. And I have seen a lot of clients when over the past weeks, when I talk with them, the biggest worry is clearly inflation in the coming years. So they are thinking to invest a little bit in gold. They start to consider that gold should be part of the portfolio, which has not been the case for many years for most investors. So some of them consider it should be 2-3% of the portfolio of investors. It could make sense actually, because as I said, we are very bad to forecast inflation dynamics. But if I need clearly to have a point of view in the long term, this is deflation. We are in a world of deflation. We are in a world where central banks will remain accommodative almost forever. And it means that the financial market will keep getting bigger, having much more higher prices, and you will have this phenomenon because one driver of deflation is also we see a lot of monopolies, especially new technology, and I think this will be also one driver that will pop up price higher in the stock market. I mean, we have seen over the past weeks, the biggest drivers of the stock market were some like 5-6 new technology stocks in the US. And this situation is not healthy, but as a matter of fact, it can last for quite long. I remember investors that told me like 6-7 years ago, they told me, yeah, but you know, central bank accommodative monetary policy is not healthy. At one point, we will have a stock market that will crash. But so far, I mean, we're still in the same situation. So I think we are moving to a world of deflation, central bank that will remain the biggest driver of money supply, and they won't be able to exit from accommodative monetary policy. On top of that, we will have a stock market, I think. I mean, if I need to invest, personally, I invest a big percentage of my portfolio on the equity market because I consider, yeah, maybe some stocks are too pricey. Yes, I think it's not healthy to have so many drivers only linked to new technology in the US, but I don't see anything that could push the market down sharply in the medium or even long term. I think that we are in a situation where we cannot only compare with the past. Usually we like to say, okay, yeah, but in the past recession or the past, when the last bubble burst, what has happened? But I think we are in a new situation. I mean, we have never seen so much liquidity in the market. So we need to
what you are saying is very interesting because then do you think then that we are going to face a Japanese situation for the United States, for Europe, and for the big economical, the big economical blocks in terms of print money for a long run, trying to combat this deflationary world, and this is one question, no, that comes from the things that you are saying, because if you say that we are going to face that in a long run, so we are going to have that. This is one point. The other point is what is going to happen with the debt of the countries, this super debt that they have in a deflationary world, because they need inflation to pay the debts. This has been the way states pay the debts from a long time ago, And what is going to happen in your mind with this situation?
Well, I agree with you. I mean, we're in a situation of Japanization. In the European Union, it has started a bit earlier than in the US, but this is the clear path. This is not healthy. I mean, we have demographic is one way to see that we are facing Japanization. Central bank, monetary supply, negative interest rates. We see a lot of zombification of the economy. I mean, because central banks and the governments, they don't want to let down companies. So we are in a situation where a lot of companies are virtually zombie companies. I mean, and it will be much bigger in the coming weeks because they don't want to see unemployment rise. So what they will do, they will keep companies that are not able to cope with the situation still working because they will get a lot of subsidies, but this is not healthy. After all, it's a political choice, but still it's not good for the economy. So this situation of Japanization, I don't think we are able to fight against it. We have seen that money supply is not the right answer. We have seen that when we are in a situation of deflation or at least very sharp deflationary forces, central banks don't know how to fight against it. So I think this is a new period of economic history where we will follow the path of Japan. That it doesn't mean it's all negative in terms of global wealth. But as a matter of fact, it means that some economic sectors, they will never recover. I mean, working in the banking sector and financial sector, I'm very realistic on the fact that most of European banks, they can innovate as much as they want. I mean, I don't want to own banks in my portfolio because I don't think it's worthy. With negative interest rates, we'll never get out from negative interest rates. So this is not the right path. And the other part of the question is public debt. I think what we have seen over the past 6 months is that central bank, they will never let government down. They will never let government really repay the debt. We are in a situation of de facto monetization of public debt. That's why at the end of the day, we cannot have central banks increasing interest rates or exiting from quantitative easing. It makes me laugh when I see that some policymakers, and I understand it's their job, but when they tell you, no, but the European Central Bank will exit from quantitative easing in 2022, 2023. No, it will never happen. We don't have inflation, so we cannot deal with public debt or even private debt. So what can we do? The only way is to have central banks monetizing public debt. And we are doing that actually already, but it will be much explicitly said in the coming years, because when you have a level of public debt, I think if I take the example of France, due to the COVID, Public debt, I think, will rise from 100% of GDP to 125, 130% next year. This is huge. You barely have economic activity. At best, when you will have recovery, you will be at 2% long term. You don't have inflation. So what do you do? I mean, you can repay your debt only if you have very low interest rates, meaning that the central bank is buying a big chunk of your public debt. So that's the only way, and I don't see any exit. So it's not even getting back to the 70s. It's something else. It's a situation where central banks and governments have no other choice than to work together, because if they don't work together, you will have one of the biggest public debt crises ever. So the only path is to do much more quantitative easing, knowing that it's not so good for the economy, it's not working so well for the real economy, but at least you will avoid a debt crisis. This morning, before we had the call, I was looking at some systemic risk indicator for the European Union, especially regarding the sovereign debt risk, extremely low. So low. There is no risk for investors regarding public debt, because they all understood that at the end of the day, that's the central bank that is buying everything. And it has been the case. I read a report that was extremely interesting for developed countries. Nowadays, central banks own between 20% to 50% of the total stock of public debt. So this is monetization, but that's quite clear.
To say domo arigato. Since we don't have, so this is a situation. This okay. I mean, this discussion is drifting towards towards investment. So I'm glad in that sense, because we're picking a little bit your brain regarding your portfolio. And I have a question that is, okay, if we take this for granted, then what's your take on the global portfolio strategy? I mean, I have this idea of, okay, we can invest where given these circumstances. So we have global investments, we have many different assets, so different factors. So what's the general idea that you would use regarding this idea, okay, I'm going to put the money where? Because the situation is spreading all around the world.
Yeah.
So do you think different type of asset classes, different type of factors regarding stocks, for instance, or what's your general idea about it?
Well, as I said, for my portfolio, clearly I have a very strong exposition in terms of equity market, mostly the US equity market. This is not very original, I would say, but this is where, yeah, but you have good returns. So at the end of the day, I'm not digging in some, I don't know, emerging market country where I don't understand everything. So I think the equity market, US equity market, is still very worthy, and I will keep investing in the equity market in the US. I am looking a little bit at climate change stocks, all the ESG stocks, but all these kind of assets, because I think I read you never know if Joe Biden is elected, he has very ambitious climate change plan. I think it's like 2.5% of US GDP over 4 years. It is a very big climate change plan. So, and I think it needs to be part of the portfolio. I think we had already this discussion, but I'm not someone that implemented the ideology in my portfolio. So I have my own opinion by climate change, but that's not why I will invest. Just because I think this is worthy nowadays, and it is a trendy investment. On top of that, I invest quite a lot, but this is my personal taste, I would say. I love art, so I invest a lot in art. And this is something I love, and I do it often, but
it's a different asset class. That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to own government bonds, because I think this is not worthy anymore. I might have like 10% of my portfolio still in government bonds, but if I want to look for safe haven, I love to buy art. I think it's good investment if you understand what you are buying. And as I said, I have like 2-3% of my portfolio in gold, mostly paper, because I think we never know for the risk of inflation. But you see, it's not a big exposure, and I'm not so much worried about it. But yeah, I mean, this is quite clear for me. You need to invest in the US equity market. you need to have big technological stocks. I don't care about regulation. I don't care about what's going to happen with Facebook in terms of advertising. What I see it's very strong companies with a lot of cash most of the time. They have a kind of monopolistic situation or oligopolistic situation. So, I mean, this is quite clear. I follow the trend. I'm not a contrarian usually when I invest. So I think this is the best thing. And as a French, personally, I don't invest on the French stock market. I think you don't have good returns on investment. Most of the companies, except for luxury companies, you have often the government that is on the board. So it's not really the good, I don't think it's good investment.
Well, this is
so I totally agree with you. I think, and sometimes this is because I totally buy your opinion about the big technology companies and what is going on. And if you see also Japan, Japan, of course, if we have the situation, or we will have the situation that you are saying, most of the companies that we know, industrial companies, big technology, these zombie companies, they are not going to grow. Banks, they are not going to grow. You will have to go to technology sectors. You will have to go, as you said, to US economy that is more efficient in terms of making business. And of course, I totally agree with you in this talking. And if the situation is what you say, these big dividend companies that are strong companies, they are going to continue growing because they are almost like Nestle or something like this. They are almost like a bond, no?
Completely. I mean, it completely makes sense, yeah.
So thank you very much, Christopher. I think
Thanks
we
a lot.
have reached the time for this talking. We are just looking forward to having you again in the next to talk about what is going on in the market, and we will look to the arms.
Thank you.
We will have a look to the
Yeah,
arms.
you should. I mean, if you need some tips, I bought something beautiful and I can send it to you. I will show you.
Okay.
You are a good seller, man.
Thank you.
Thank you a lot.
Thank you, Christopher. Thank you. Thanks
Thank
a lot.
you very much. Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.